Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us at Life Community for this season of Life Groups. We're going to be spending 5 weeks breaking down Mark Clark's book, The Problem of Life. In here, he's talking about how we can accomplish human flourishing. He addresses questions of origin, of purpose, even of pain and suffering and death. So I hope that you're willing to dive in, ask good questions, and be honest with where you're at.
Hey guys, welcome back to week 3 of our Spring Life Group series. As you know, we've been working our way through Mark Clark's The Problem of Life. This week, we'll take a look at how Clark handles the problem of pain and suffering. To get us there, I want to tell a story. A couple weeks ago, I got my first dirt bike. For those of you who care about that sort of thing, it's a 2001 Honda XR 250R. For those of you who don't, it's red and it's loud. When I bought the bike, I knew that it had some work to be done before it was good to start riding. Now, when I bought it, we were able to get it started well enough to try it out, just so that we knew it worked. However, about a week after I bought it, I thought that I would go out and start it again, just for the fun of it. I was super excited to try it because it was my first dirt bike ever, and when we bought it, my friend who was way more experienced was the one that actually test drove it, and so now I wanted to turn on it. So, I went out and I tried to kickstart it a few times, and I had no luck. It felt a little silly, but I believe God cares even about the small things, so I began to pray about it. I asked God to be with me in the moment and to please let the bike start so that I could try it out. And then I got back to trying to start it. I kickstarted the bike again and again and again, and I tried everything every YouTube video was telling me to do to start it, and nothing happened. After 30 minutes, I finally gave up. And by this point, I was super tired and super frustrated. I was frustrated at the bike for not starting, but also at God for not letting it start. I figured, God, if you love me as your own child, why wouldn't you just let the bike start so that I could enjoy it? What was the downside of letting it start? Do you just not really care? See, in that moment, I had an expectation that if I went to God, that he would solve my problem, that he would bring me out of the difficulty of starting the dirt bike so that I could enjoy it. And so when he didn't fix it, I assumed that he didn't care about me as much as I thought he did. And because of that admittedly slight inconvenience, I allowed a momentary wedge to fall in place between myself and God. Now, that's obviously a very silly example of what suffering can look like. But generally, I think it functions the same way when more serious things happen. I don't think anyone would deny that suffering and pain are realities of this fallen world. Relationships fall apart, couples get divorced, friends and family die, people suffer from seemingly random diseases and injuries, and the list could go on and on and on with real examples of suffering. The problem with all of this is that we believe in a loving, all-powerful, and all-knowing God. How can those two realities exist together? So the important question here tonight isn't, is there suffering? It is, how do we reconcile the suffering we experience with the existence of God? Mark Clark asks, how could a good God exist if this is the way that things are? And he summarizes this whole idea in this way. No one escapes pain. It is a basic fact of life. But it's no use just pointing this out. We must ask how to think about it and what to do about it as we journey through this life. Like with my dirt bike example, if we don't see suffering in the right way, the pain and suffering we experience can become a wedge in our relationship with God. And so let's pause for a second and reflect on and discuss how pain and suffering tend to impact our relationship with God. See you guys in a second. Hey, welcome back. I hope your discussion time allowed an opportunity to be honest and encouraging to one another as we talk about this difficult topic. Now, as we just went over, a major problem that each of us faces is that we can tend to allow suffering to drive a wedge into our relationships with God. Now, in my experience, whenever we face suffering, we tend to assume that because of the suffering we experienced, that God doesn't love us or doesn't care about us the way that we thought he did. And so our relationship with him suffers. Now, when we stop and think for a moment, we know that God is a good God who does love and care about us deeply. At least that's what the Bible tells us is true. For example, Psalm 86:15 says, "But you, O Lord, are a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness." Abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. But if we're being honest, it's hard to believe in that love and faithfulness when we are in the midst of pain and suffering. And I think this is why. We like to make the assumption that if God loves us, then we shouldn't experience pain and suffering. And so, therefore, if we do experience those things, it must mean that God is neglecting us because he doesn't love us or care for us. So, here is the reality that we need to replace that assumption with. Jesus Christ suffered terrible things on the cross for our sake. Now, you might ask, what does that have to do with our suffering? Well, Hebrews 5:7-8 says that in the days of his flesh, Jesus offered up prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears to him who was able to save him from death, and he was heard because of his reverence. Although he was a son, he learned obedience through what he suffered. Now, the author of Hebrews is saying that Christ had to face suffering. He prayed with the right heart posture as the Son of God that he wouldn't have to suffer, and God heard him, and God still told him no. Mark Clark goes so far as to say that suffering was central to who Christ was and what he was here to do. And then he cites Isaiah 53, verse 3. He was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with his wounds we are healed. That means that according to Clark, Christ experienced physical, psychological, emotional, and spiritual pain at levels we can't even imagine, all to make sure we wouldn't have to experience those things forever. So then, Christ on the cross is the ultimate evidence for the fact that even when we are in the midst of pain and suffering, God still deeply loves and cares for us. Next, we're going to talk about what we can do about that reality, but let's take a moment to discuss that idea in more detail. Hey guys, welcome back. Hopefully, through this discussion, you've begun to see pain and suffering in a new light. Now, through Christ's work on the cross, we have seen that God's love does not mean that there won't be suffering. So then, if that's the case, what do we actually do when we suffer or experience pain moving forward? I think that there are two things that we have to do before we walk away tonight. First, we need to recognize that our suffering is actually enduring hardship alongside Christ. So in Isaiah 43, verse 2, God says, "When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers they shall not overwhelm you. When you walk through fire, you shall not be burned, and the flame shall not consume you." See, anytime we are suffering, we know that we are not suffering alone. Not only is there godly community around us that we can lean on, but we have a God who knows what suffering is like because of the cross, who can empathize with us and sustain us. And second, it is crucial that we see where suffering fits into God's redemptive plans. The world would say that suffering is meaningless, that there is no purpose for it, it's just bad things happening. That means that all it can lead to is despair. But the Bible tells us that suffering does have a purpose in God's redemptive plans. For example, Romans 5:3 says that suffering produces endurance. James 1:2 through 3 says to count it a joy when we face trials because it produces steadfastness. And First Peter 1, verses 6 through 7 say that trials prove the genuineness of our faith. Reminiscent of Psalm 66, Mark Clark summarizes all of these ideas by describing suffering as something like a refining fire. He says, "Suffering refines us by removing all that is not of ultimate lasting value and worth. It reveals what lasts and is used by God to transform us and train us into people fit for His kingdom. In life, whether it is the experience of muscle being built through the pain of working out, or the depth of knowledge that comes only through the struggle of persistent study, the things worth having come at a cost." The hard reality is that there is no escaping pain and suffering. And yet, those very things are being used to God's glory and for our eventual good. This means that whenever we do experience pain and suffering, we have a choice to make. We can either let the pain and suffering act as a wedge in our relationships with God, or we can choose to remember Christ, to remember the suffering that He went through on our behalf, and take a step closer to Him and allow God's glory to be seen in our lives. And so let's talk about how we can do that in our everyday lives moving forward. I've got some final discussion questions for you guys to talk through, and then I'll be right back to close us out tonight. Hey guys, thanks for going through this video with us tonight. I pray that as we've gone through this video series so far, that you guys have been forming new connections and you've been getting closer to God and learning more about who we are as people made in His image. And so for tonight specifically, because we talked about pain and suffering, I'm guessing there might have been some difficult things that came up. But I actually think that's going to be an awesome opportunity for all of us to practice prayer. And so I would encourage you guys, for any of those difficult things that have come up, pray for one another. Take a couple minutes and slow down and just speak life into each other and ask God to do amazing things in difficult situations. And so I pray that you guys have a great rest of your night, and I'm excited to talk to you next week.